he first tells you he sees Joshua Rosa as they go to the park. He calls it dusk. He says that on more than one occasion. We have established that on December 8th, by way of a stipulation, that at 5:35 was sunset. Certainly we all know by our everyday common experiences that sunset is not dark, that there's lots of light for lots of time after sunset. That is a formal name given by the Bureau, the Weather Bureau, and various armed forces agencies. Use your daily experiences to deduct and consider that when we talk about sunset. He sees Joshua Rosa coming from the woods. In his words, from this area here at red, and you're going to have this back to look at, and I ask you to look at it in total and look at it as you survey the scene and the area and what proposes to happen in the next hour. Ladies and gentlemen, if Joshua Rosa had murdered Stephen Tomlinson, would he run frantically directly to a car, begging, literally begging for someone to help, to give him a cell phone? There's somebody hurt back there. Now, of course not, the answer would be. Now, Mr. Pruner has told you that he had concealment. Well, he already had concealment. He didn't need concealment. If he needed concealment, he would have stayed in the woods. Look at this place. If you committed a murder, you think you might be able to find somewhere to go if you wanted to conceal yourself from sight? If you wanted to conceal yourself from any knowledge that you had been involved in a crime? I would suggest to you that if Joshua Rosa was seeking to conceal himself, then it certainly didn't make sense to do what he did. He could have escaped undetected in the manner in which this area is laid out. Much has been said, and you will hear more, I'm sure, from Mr. Pruner about Joshua Rosa not mentioning or not saying Stephen Tomlinson's name when asked. Well, again, I want you to consider and I want you to think about what the circumstances are. And it certainly, you know, it's not an acknowledgement of a crime. I can tell you that. I want you to consider what happened as that was going on. Joshua Rosa had just found the body of someone severely injured. Forget that he knew Stephen Tomlinson for a second. He's frantic, he's scared, it's chaotic. All of those words are used by various witnesses and various people that testify in this case. All those words at varying times. And if they can all be used at varying times by varying witnesses, then they can certainly all be used in the same sentence. He runs directly to a group of strangers who don't know him and who he doesn't know. He doesn't know they know Stephen Tomlinson, or whether they do or whether they don't. And quite frankly, it's easily understood why under those circumstances he doesn't take the time to be concerned about who it is, what the identity is. There are other serious matters at hand, and that's the life of Stephen Tomlinson at that point in time. Because, as you know, and as we've heard, Stephen Tomlinson was alive, certainly at the point when Josh Rosa was there, because, in fact, he was alive when they went back there, and that was some little bit of time later. It's not evidence of culpability. It's evidence of his need to retrieve help. We then heard from Cassie Johnson, who has some significant experience in DNA. She is from Cellmark, which is in Dallas, a private lab, an outsource. Many times when FDLE can't do something, or FDLE is, at a dead end, or something else needs to be done. And in fact, what happens is Amy Rockhold sends the nail clipping extracts, okay, not the nail clippings, but the extracts to Cassie Johnson. And she essentially is Amy Rockhold's safety net for these clippings. And again, remember, the right-hand clipping was only Stephen Tomlinson, showing a profile only for himself. And ladies and gentlemen, ask yourself if Stephen Tomlinson was struggling and fighting for his life, and we're not talking about being shot in the head or stabbed in the heart or beat over the back of the head with a bat. We know it was a dynamic situation as set forth by numerous different people. Why was there no DNA on Stephen Tomlinson's hands and fingers? Now, I stepped away a little bit from the clippings, but now I'm talking about his hands and his fingers. The one and most probable source of everything that he could do to stay alive rests in his hands and arms. Now, I don't want to limit the possibility of his feet and his legs, but certainly that is the most common means of defending yourself, especially in a situation like this. Whether it be from behind, whether it be from here, whether it be in any situation. Why is there no DNA on his hands and his fingers? DNA is some spectacular stuff. I don't think we can rise and fall with it, as I believe I'm proving to you and will continue to show you based on the evidence. But the bottom line is it's some powerful stuff. Why wouldn't Josh Rosa's DNA be on the victim's primary means to defend himself or to create any viewable, credible injuries on Joshua Rosa? Again, he wasn't knocked unconscious. He wasn't stabbed in a vital organ. He wasn't shot. So Cassie Johnson does her testing. And what Cassie Johnson tells us is that when you do YSDR, you're going to have 17 markers, 17 different places where they look. Okay? And what she tells you is that she got information consistent with Stephen Tomlinson at those markers, and she only got information that can exclude Joshua Rosa at 3 of the 17 markers. And this is DNA, people. We're not talking about 3 minivans. We're not talking about 3 tractor trailers. We're talking about 3 areas of DNA out of 17. And I anticipate the state's going to tell you, well, if there were more, if there was more DNA, there may be, more places, and, we had limited quantities. Well, we had what we had. And they tested what they had, and you know what the result was? The result was, very simply, that the way this works is that you have several populations and several ethnic groups. And those ethnic groups are set forth in a database. And you put that sample in, and you punch a number, and it's going to give you a number based on that particular ethnic group. But what it doesn't tell you, what science doesn't tell you unless you ask, is that it doesn't tell you what the ethnic group is of the contributor. Okay? So the bottom line is, you heard Cassie Johnson say that essentially all of this does is not exclude Josh Rosa of being a person that could have contributed to that sample. But what makes that even more startling as you consider it in your deliberations is look at the report. And we talked about the report. The report is essentially that if you were the contributor to this sample under Stephen Tomlinson's fingernails, and you weren't Josh Rosa, you were an African American. If you were an African American, it would be 1 in 5. So every 1 in 5 African Americans, as it relates to that database, would have similar DNA pattern and wouldn't be excluded. If you were a Caucasian and you happen to be the contributor to that DNA sample, then it would be 1 in 20. And I don't know, not in jest, but certainly out of curiosity, I asked Ms. Johnson, well, how many African Americans did you pass since you got out of the car? Because more than likely she would have passed enough to where one of them could have been the contributor to this unknown sample. And as it relates to Hispanics, it would be 1 in 12. So if there were 12 Hispanics sitting in this box, one of them could also have the same potential profile as the person that left that DNA under or on Stephen Tomlinson's clippings. And Cassie Johnson, I believe, showed us the very reason why we should be so concerned with scientific evidence. Because if you know what you're doing, you can't be blinded by the light. You can't be blinded by the light and blinded by the numbers. So don't be blinded. This is not Joshua Rose's DNA on that fingernail clipping. It's no more Joshua Rose's DNA on that fingernail clipping than every 12th Hispanic that you will pass when you leave this courtroom. Cassie Johnson used the word Joshua Rosa can't be excluded so many times that I stopped writing it down on my paper. I just stopped. I said, how many times can you say somebody can't be excluded? But you know what? This is not CSI. This is not Law and Order. And it's everyday interaction between people that know each other.